All right, hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde, and welcome to this afternoon's conversation as Patrick Lejtenyi checks in with Kayleigh Hutt-Taylor to discuss her recent paper on how private trees contribute to urban forest diversity. We are streaming on YouTube live from Concordia University's fourth space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities. So to that end, we are so pleased to welcome Patrick and his guest back into the space today for this brief conversation. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Anna. I'm sitting here with Kayleigh Hutt-Taylor. She is a project coordinator of nature-based solutions at Loyola campus. She completed her MSc earlier this year in urban ecology, and we're going to be discussing her new paper that appeared in the journal Urban Forestry and Urban Greening. So Kayleigh, thank you for joining me. Now this paper is the culmination of a project led by Professor Carly Zeder in the biology department that began several years ago. Can you tell me a little bit about the project and what you've learned about it since?
Yeah, absolutely. The project was really motivated by kind of a gap in knowledge in urban forestry, especially in cities where a lot of our research focuses on public trees, trees on public land, because many cities now have inventories of what trees exist, specifically street trees and park trees. A lot of our research relies on those inventories to understand urban forests, what species are there, what they look like, and things like that. But a lot of the time we're missing crucial kind of components of the urban forest, which are trees on private land. Most of that, depending on the city fabric, is in private residential yards. And so in 2020, we launched this project to do a pilot study where we inventoried trees in private land. And we really shifted to this community science project because obviously we were not able to go out and go door to door asking if we could survey trees in people's backyards. But it turned into a really fulfilling portion of the project because we were able to launch this community science project where we asked residents in NDG to go out and measure their trees in their own backyards and submit it to our project. And so this resulted in an inventory of well over 1,000 or 5,000 trees. And we had 98 submissions where we had residents actually contributing that knowledge. So now we had a better understanding or holistic understanding of those trees on private land. And it turns out they're quite unique compared to the trees in our public spaces.
Yeah, well, I think we'll get to that in a bit, but I guess my next question was sort of, you mentioned that there's a real difference in how the tree populations are managed compared to those managed by the municipality or the city and those by private homeowners and institutions. You're mentioning places like schools and churches and things like that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of interesting work kind of looking at different motivations and goals and aims of different decision makers of where plant trees are actually planted. So for example, you can imagine that a land manager who's deciding to plant a tree along a street block may be taking into consideration things like, is this tree tolerant of stresses? Things like drought tolerance, things like salt tolerance, things like that are kind of unique to that green space type. An individual resident might be thinking of very different things. They might be thinking, hey, I'd really love to have some fruit on this tree in my backyard so that we can enjoy some jam in the fall. Or they might be thinking, I'd love a flowering species. I need something to be small or that can survive in the shade in this corner of my backyard. And we found that actually leads to measurable differences in what trees are there because we all have unique motivations for why we're planting a tree in the spot it is.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the benefits of having a biodiverse urban tree population?
Oh, there's many. From an ecological standpoint, obviously having a diverse population of trees for the greater urban forest results in a more multifunctional landscape, meaning that trees are providing different functions and different services. We often refer to ecosystem services in our work, which are the benefits that trees provide us. Having a diverse population of trees can provide different functions like temperature regulation, air pollution, recreational spaces, aesthetic beauty. On top of that, having a diverse population of trees also can provide a more resilient forest to things like climate change or changes in kind of the environmental fabric of the city, as well as pests and disease. A lot of us know the emerald ash borer, which has really come through and hit a lot of the ash trees within even Montreal. Some of us might recognize that a lot of those trees are gone or had one removed from our backyard. If that species dominated the landscape, we could be losing 50% of our trees. So it's important to have a diverse range of species. So if something comes through, we have resilience to it.
Well, speaking of resilience, I mean, you mentioned in the paper how important it is for you to maintain a sort of not only a biodiverse species, but diversity in age and maturity of the trees. Can you explain that as well?
Yeah, for sure. So similar to kind of what I was just saying, having a diverse range of species allows us to be resilient to threats to the urban forest, whatever those might look like. But similarly, having a diverse age structure is really crucial to not only forestry in general, but when we think of the context of a city, we can think of a land manager looking out, and if we had trees that were all mature, and maybe 100 years old, we're looking at facing a lot of die-off and having to replace those trees. Obviously, if that percentage of trees is 70%, our land managers are going to have a huge amount of work to do to replace those trees. So having an age structure that covers kind of a wide range where we have a more manageable set of young trees, middle-aged trees, and large trees that might be at higher risk to disease, but also provide a lot of services, really helps in managing the urban forest.
Okay, let's just look at the results for a bit. So you found that the Norway maple was far and away the most common tree. What are some of the other characteristics that you picked up from the study?
Well, we also found, I think some of the interesting things that we found were some of those things that we just touched on. So the age structure and size of trees, we found that private yards had smaller statured trees, which was an interesting outcome, but makes a lot of sense when we think of the context of having limited space within our yards and maybe wanting to have more than one tree, or maybe wanting to have a tree and a shrub. We saw that really coming out. Another thing that we saw was when we looked at service-based traits, which are those traits that are related to services and the benefits that trees provide. Private spaces really covered a wide range of those services, which I think is really interesting in the sense that it shows that private residents really are kind of making different decisions in terms of the trees that they're planting, and that's resulting in a wider range of benefits in those private spaces. And that's important in terms of a multifunctional landscape. So if we have very similar trees in our streets, for example, because we need them to suit a certain criteria, at least we have these private trees that are also creating that wider range of services across the city.
Great. Yes, I'll just end this. I'll end with this. What do you recommend to homeowners and municipalities to what can they do to maintain and nurture a thriving and healthy and diverse tree population?
There's a few things that I always like to touch on, which are always trying to promote kind of native tree species planting. Those are the trees that are naturalized and naturally occur within our area. There's a lot of push within our municipalities to plant those trees. And I always encourage landowners to look at whether a tree is native to our area. It's always best to plant those trees if we can. And then the other thing I like to say is maybe look at what your neighbor has planted and try and plant something different. I think it's a nice way to kind of create a more diverse population of trees within the landscape and have kind of that promotion across our neighborhoods.
All right, well, thank you very much. That was Kayleigh Hutt-Taylor. She's the project coordinator of nature-based solutions at Loyola campus. She completed her MSc earlier this year in urban ecology. And she, along with Professor Carly Zeder of the Department of Biology, we're just discussing her paper in the journal Urban Forestry and Urban Greening. Kayleigh, thank you very much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Kayleigh, so much for coming in to sharing your research with us. Congratulations on the paper. And Patrick, we look forward to the media release piece about this great research. All right, folks, we're going to cut off the live stream now. Say goodbye to all of you hanging out in YouTube and hope to see you next time. Thanks, everybody.